Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tank12, I mean call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are today taking a look at all of the new Bond tanks that have been added as of the 1st of June. We're talking about the Panzer IV Schmallturm, we're talking about the KV-5, we're talking about the Foch 155, and finally the M41D. I think that should be all of them. And in this video we're going to have some gameplay, just a little bit in the background, and I'm going to tell you guys, hopefully in a short and easy way, what these tanks really are, and if they are worth it. These are not going to be full-on reviews, but just general overview. If you're really interested in any of these vehicles right now, I'm going to give you a little bit of my my cup of tea. Oh, excuse me, still have a little bit of of a cough, unfortunately. But yeah, we're gonna start with probably the most legendary vehicle out of all of them, and that is the KV-5. Now the KV-5 was a tank that they really it's one of the first premium tanks, if not the first premium tank in World of Tanks. It's been around for 11 years, and they haven't sold it very often. After they took it out of the shop, the tech tree where you were able to buy it for gold, you were not really able to get your hands on this bad boy for a very long time, at least 6 years. I remember that they sold it in the year 2015, somewhere along that time, but after that it was quite difficult to get your hand on the KV-5. And for good reason, probably sometimes, because the KV-5 is a bit of it's a different kind of beast that has had a lot of ups and downs, just like the game, and I think it's a pretty good representation of World of Tanks in the last couple of years. So you have a massive beast, a huge tank that weighs a whopping, what is it, where I wrote that down somewhere, it weighs a lot of 105 tons. So it's a super heavy tank, and it's actually quite fast. 40 kilometers per hour top speed. The horsepower to weight ratio, on the other hand, is not the best, 11.98 horsepower per ton, which I think you can definitely increase with the turbo, and that's also what I did. I put a turbo on it to be able to ram tanks, because this is a tank that is really a lot of fun. It has a gun that is a Pz 6. It's a gun that you remember from the KV-1 back in the day, or from the KV tank. It's a 107mm gun that is a tier 7 gun as well, with 300 alpha damage and 196mm of penetration. But yeah, that pen is terrible, and the premium ammunition penetration is also quite horrendous at 219mm. This tank has preferential matchmaking, so you'll never be facing tier 10 tanks, but the gun is not that competitive. But I have to be honest, accuracy 0.4 at 100 meters dispersion, and 2.3 seconds aim time. It's not all just doom and gloom. The tank itself, against lightly armored vehicles, especially with the high rate of fire that you have with this gun, it can do some serious damage. Shooting medium tanks, tank destroyers that are lightly armored, light tanks, even heavy tanks that have some weak spots, you can do some serious damage. And I think you need to have some respect for the KV-5, because the armor is another feature that really makes this tank this beast that it is. It has 180mm of frontal armor. The turret is 190mm thick. There are a lot of flat surfaces, there are a lot of different angles. There is like the R2-D2 turret at the front, which is the major weak spot of the KV-5, and if you are able to hit that, usually you're going to be able to penetrate the tank. But there are a lot of ways to play this vehicle. You can bounce so many shells. In this replay you'll see me bounce shots from the side, right next to me, behind me, in front of me. These are just the things that do happen whenever you play the KV-5. It's a bouncing machine, and I think it's definitely one of those legendary tanks that should be given the respect it deserves. because I think it's a lot of fun. I enjoy my KV-5. It's not the most competitive out there anymore, and obviously it's not going to be able to hold a candle to some other tier 8 premium tanks that have amazing penetration, no weak spots at all, and even, you know, maybe top speed. But the KV-5 has style, so that's really something great. Is it a tank that I would get for 8,000 bonds in World Tanks? If you're a tank collector, if you love this game, if you like the history of it, this is a tank that you probably already own. If you do not, well, I guess this is the perfect time to get yourself a hold of the KV-5. But generally speaking, a very cool vehicle and one of my favorites out of the premium tanks that are still around. The Löwe certainly has held up better. It has gotten some really nice buffs. The KV-5 on the other hand has still kind of remained the same. Very cool tank, I like it, and yeah, it does not have the best track record probably nowadays, but sometimes I think the past also has a little bit of something to play. Okay, so the next vehicle on the line is the M41D, which is a tier 8 Chinese premium light tank, or a Taiwanese light tank because it was used by the armed forces of Taiwan, and it's a pretty cool tank. It's another M41, so we know the platform. The DPM is very good. It has a 76mm gun that has 192mm of penetration with standard APCR shells, which have a whopping 1,257 meters per second shell velocity, which is really nice. And then it has a premium APCR shell with even better shell velocity of 1,433 meters per second, but only improves the penetration by about 30 millimeters. So it's at 227 millimeters instead of the 200 and 192. So yeah, the high explosive shell, nothing to talk about. 38 millimeters of penetration, nothing that special. The gun itself is fairly competitive, high rate of fire, decent dispersion, good aim time. Penetration is okay, so if you're going up against other light tanks, you're going to be a bit of a menace. The dispersion values are also quite good, 0.14 while moving, and turning the tracks. Turret traverse is actually only 0.06, so that's pretty nice. This tank has great top speed. It has incredible power to weight ratio of 31 horsepower per ton, and it's a very speedy tank. It's a very nice light tank that has great characteristics all over. 1,100 HP. It's maybe a bit big because it's an M41 Walker Bulldog. These tanks usually are quite large, but it has 410 meters base view range, which for a Chinese tank is very, very good. For a light tank at tier 8 is also very nice. And yeah, the armor you can pretty much ignore. You have 9 degrees of gun depression. Generally speaking, a very, very good tank that does have a little bit of a bad track record on soft terrain when you're turning your tracks, but other than that, top speed will be held up, and if you're using the turbo, you can increase the top speed even more, get it all the way to 70, 73, maybe 72 kilometers per hour top speed, and I think generally speaking a very good scout for 8,000 bonds. The thing is just, do you really need it if you already have, for example, the M4190GF? That thing has a 90mm gun, so it can brawl. It's a bit different. It's very similar, at least from the platform, but you know, I think if you have one, you don't really need the other one. I like my M41D because it reminds me of the old school Walker Bulldog without the autoloader, and I still like to have that around, but unfortunately I sold that out. I sold that vehicle, so I still have the B variant. If you're trying to get a crew trainer for your Chinese tanks, this is probably a pretty good option. It's also one of the only options you have at tier 8. But I think generally speaking, nothing too special here. Nice tank, but you know, nothing too special. And if you're not too interested in another Walker Bulldog M41, you can pretty much pass this one up and still enjoy the Chinese light tanks, which are quite interesting. They're quite fascinating in my opinion. So we're gonna move on to the other tank, but first I'll have to find my notes on that. So the Panzer IV Schmallturm, which used to be the standard Panzer IV in world tanks at tier 5. You used to have the exact same turret, you used to have the exact same gun, which is a 75 centimeter KW K-44-1L70, which is basically the same gun you carry on the E25. Now, this tank probably will anger a lot of older World Tanks players, and I am one of them. I really like to play this tank, I enjoy it a lot, but every single time I play it, I have this, swelling anger, because it's the age-old wargaming way of cutting content from the game to resell it back to you. So this Panzer Kampfwagen 4 used to be a tier 5, you used to have all of these things at tier 5, you could play your Panzer 4 as a Derp 105, with this turret, or you could play with the 75 and be a very, very amazing sniper. Now, that no longer exists. If you want to play this tank, you'll have to get it via the pawn shop or buy it. And it has some really nice values. Nice DPM, great great aim time, great dispersion. Doesn't have the best penetration, 150 with the AP and 194 with the APCR, but you're still going to be able to do work with this thing. The armor, is okay. The turret armor for a tier 6 is fairly competent, 120 millimeters at the front. And I think this tank was just one of those favorites back in the days because it was so much fun to play this one. And also couple it with the derp gun. It was one of the favorites for tier 5. Now, the mobility on the tank, top speed is great, but the power to weight is terrible. 10.61 horsepower per ton is seriously really, really bad. Takes forever to reach the top speed. You have 8 degrees of gun depression, 20 degrees of gun elevation. Other than that, all of the characteristics are okay. The gun traverse is not the best. I think it's somewhere along the lines of 25 degrees per second, and also the track traverse for a medium tank is in the okay area of 37.5 degrees per second. Its reverse is quite lacking, 18 kilometers per hour top speed going backwards, so you have to keep that in mind. Other than that, it's a tier 6 premium tank that has a very good gun, is very fun to play when you're sniping, when you're just, shooting at targets that are a bit further away. The rate of fire is fairly high, so you can also be quite a dangerous tank up close. You just do not have the armor or the HP usually to tank, but you're still going to be able to do a lot of damage even to heavy tanks because of the sheer rate of fire and that beautiful accuracy. It will give you a lot of ways to actually play this vehicle. You can play it close, you can play it a bit further away. So generally speaking, pretty cool tank if there was not history behind it, and that history being wargaming and their policies, which are completely dumb. I wanted to say a very aggressive word. But their policies are pretty dumb, that they take out content, refurbish it, put it back in as a premium variant. Nobody wants to see that. We didn't like it with the ISU 152K. We don't like it with the Panzer IV Schmallturm. Wargaming, please stop. Thank you very much. Now finally, we're coming to the final tank that you guys were probably thinking about, and I have to say a lot of different things first. First and foremost, the AMX 50 Foch 155 is a legendary tank. Nobody can say anything else. There are legendary battles between the Foch 155 and the Waffenträger of E100. Nobody forgets these things where they're clipping each other out, and a Foch 155 player running around with only high explosive doing like 3k damage with all 3 shells. These things are amazing. These stories are what make World Tanks what it is today, and these are the things that we always remember fondly of. The Foch 155 is no longer that kind of tank. That's distant memory. It is a tank that I have enjoyed quite a lot. I still enjoy playing it, but something just doesn't feel right. Let me reiterate, I played this tank quite a few times, but I haven't played it as often as other players, so I'm probably not the best player to completely give you a kind of a roundup on the vehicle. I also do not have all of the field modifications unlocked, which is going to be quite important for tier 10 vehicles nowadays. But one of the things is that the characteristics are all wrong. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. So you have 2330 DPM with 155mm gun, which has 3 shells in a magazine. Each one of them does 750 alpha, so that's the average damage you do. 293mm of penetration, which sounds amazing with the AP shells. And, well, intraclip reload is 3 seconds. Intraclip reload is 5 seconds per shot. So you're going to be reloading 10 seconds because the first shot will already be loaded immediately, but the other 2 you'll have to wait 10 seconds. That's quite a long time, especially if you look at the vehicles that are running around. For example, TVP, Skoda TVP 50/51. If that thing is in front of you, it's just gonna eat you up in those 10 seconds. So basically you have to be a bit careful. Aim time is not the best, 2.88 seconds for fully aimed in reticle. The dispersion values sound okay, 0.35 sounds pretty damn good for an auto-loading tier 10 tank destroyer, right? So you'd think that isn't too bad, but there are a lot of hidden things about this vehicle. The shells are very expensive. 1,560 for the standard shell, which is very expensive if you think about it. And you pay 6,800 for the heat shells. The heat shells have 395mm of penetration, so basically there is almost no other shell that does that much or has that much penetration. But we'll have to talk about that in just a second. Top speed in the vehicle, 50 kilometers per hour. Top speed sounds great, is also okay, is nice. Power to weight isn't too bad, 18.36 horsepower per ton, so doesn't sound too bad. You're going to be able to get from one place to another, but the reverse speed, my fucking god, the reverse speed is the worst thing that has happened to mankind. 13 kilometers per hour in reverse, are you kidding me? Who the hell wants to reverse with this thing? It takes forever. Tank traverse is also quite lacking, 31.29 degrees per second to turn your tank, and gun depression, gun elevation angles are pretty shocking. 6 degrees of gun depression on a tank like this. Excuse me. Even though the tank is already quite low, only having 6 degrees of gun depression is pretty terrible. The gun traverse range is only 20 degrees. 10 degrees to the left, 10 degrees to the right. So that's nothing. So you'll have to move your tank every single time you have to shoot at someone. And now we're getting to the good stuff. The armor. 180mm armor at the front, 80 on the side, 40 at the rear. Basically anything. A lot of shots will overmatch your armor at the side. You have a massive weak spot on top, which is like a bar and also a machine gun port. Very easy to hit, anyone can go through, especially if someone is loading gold, they're just going to cut right through your armor. At the front, your view range is lacking, 380 meters. For a tier 10 tank destroyer, it's probably okay. And you have 1,850 HP. So that all doesn't sound too bad. Your stationary camo is also okay. It's not the best, but I think you can live with it. And overall, the characteristics don't seem to be that bad. They don't seem to paint the vehicle in a bad light, you know? But the truth is, if you play this tank, something happens. Something happens with these numbers. Something happens with RNG. 293mm of penetration feels more like 193mm of penetration. It's really weird. You have a shell velocity of 826 meters per second. That means it takes forever for the shell to hit its target, and it feels even longer. when you are trying to lead shots, well, good luck. It's not gonna get easier with this tank. Now, what about the heat shells? You'll be thinking like, yeah, the heat shells, 395mm penetration, that sounds amazing. Well, yes, it is amazing, but the shell velocity is even worse. The shell velocity is at 826, so another drop off from the... Actually, both, it says both are similar, but I think the shell velocity is worse because I just viewed it in game prior, other than tanks GG. But yeah, the dispersion is a lie. 0.35 is not the truth behind this tank. The dispersion values are a lot worse. I'd say 0.4. Out of the 3 shots that you fire, 1 will bounce, 1 will probably not hit the target, and another one is basically going to be a low roll of 650 damage. And then you're going to be reloading for 47 seconds. That's how you play the Foch 155. And that's not even some kind of, it's realistic. That's the way you play this tank, unfortunately. That's how the Foch 155 is. And it just sucks. It's not very enjoyable when the shots don't land. And it's very frustrating. And when you get spotted, oh my god, you can just log out of the game because you're going to be dead very quickly. So yes, the Foch 155, if everything goes perfect, it's an amazing tank. It's so much fun. If you can get all 3 shots on target, my god, it's an amazing feeling. You know, do you remember the feeling when you did the same thing with the Waffenträger of E100? Land all 6 of the 128mm rounds, every single one pens, every single one does damage, and you just one-clipped a mouse? That's the feeling that we're talking about with the Foch 155. But alas, it doesn't happen often, and unfortunately, you'll have to be really, really close to be effective with this tank. And that means you'll be very ineffective because this tank doesn't do very well in close quarter combat unless the enemy is kind of distracted and not shooting you, because your armor is not going to hold up. So it's a very weird tank that does very good in certain situations, but does very, very badly in a lot of other situations. And also the characteristics are a lie. Wargaming is lying to you. Everything on this tank is RNG based. Everything. I'm not kidding. The dispersion is RNG based. The aim time is RNG based. The damage is RNG based. The penetration is RNG based. And all of these things will come together to create this deadly cocktail where nothing works, where you're frustrated and you'll have a very bad game and you'll want to sell this tank, which would be a very bad idea because you'll just lose 12,000 bonds that you just paid for the Foch 155. Other than that, if you can live with this randomized bullshit, it's a cool tank. It's a legendary tank. It's not all as much reliant on the premium shells as the Foch B is, but it also doesn't have the reliance that the Foch B has because of the better dispersion and aim time. Just a very long intra-clip reload, but I think you can live with it if you get used to the vehicle. I think this is something for the collectors that have a lot of bonds lying around and are willing to spend the bonds on something that they have never had the chance to get their hands on, and that are willing to, you know, live with the very weird kind of aspects of the tank. But yeah, that is basically what I can tell you about the Foch 155. One of my favorite French tanks, but one of my most frustrating French tanks in the game as well. So if you like getting frustrated, this is the tank for you. If you cannot live with frustration, you need to have a tank, a platform that is 100% reliable. Stay the hell away from this tank. You'll be thanking me later. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this. I know I didn't make a single review for every single vehicle, but I hope I was able to convey the most important things about every single one of these tanks. I've played every single one of the tanks, but obviously I'm not going to be an expert on every single one of the vehicles. So if your opinion varies from mine, obviously write that in the comment section. Tell me what you think about the tanks. Am I completely wrong with the Foch 155? I think it's one of those super messy, weird vehicles that just everything looks great on paper or decent on paper, but as soon as you play it, it becomes like this super big monster that just wants to hurt you. But I still enjoy it, so maybe I'm a masochist, and I like it. I like the pain. So, hopefully you guys did enjoy. As always, I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, have a good one, and yeah, stay safe.